Yes. Welcome in and welcome back to another episode of the Format Podcast. Thanks for taking the time to stop in. If you're a new listener, I really appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the show. If you're a veteran to the show, then I hope you enjoy what we do because you know how we do it. Um, for this episode, we're going to talk all college football, and normally when I talk all college football, I have a guest on, and we spend a lot of time talking Notre Dame gridiron action. But this time, I'm going to switch it up and reach out to some new people, and I hope you guys enjoy the change. Joining us today on this episode is Zach Goodall of Sports Illustrated All Gators, who's going to join us to talk Southeastern Conference, the college football playoff, and of course, his Florida Gators, who he covers. And if you're a college football fan, this should be a great one. But before we get to Zach, let's knock out the particulars. You know how it is. So first, if you're listening here on YouTube, thank you for that. Make sure you click the subscribe button in the lower right corner of your screen. Also, click that bell so that you'll be notified when we put out new episodes so you can continue to get updated on this new content whenever we bring it to you, all right? Make sure you like, subscribe, comment, whatever. The interaction's great, all right? If you prefer the audio podcast format, we're available on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean, Spotify, pretty much wherever you get your podcasts. And as I mentioned, iTunes, make sure you head over there and give us that 5-star rating, 5, because as you know, that 5-star rating helps us continue to rise in the rankings and helps us continue to know that we're bringing you quality material and help us continue to bring it to you, okay? As always, if you're on social media, you can always reach out to me directly on Twitter at Bruce F.A. Hope. That's at Bruce F.A. Hope. If you're on Instagram, you can reach out at The Format Podcast. That's at The Format Podcast. And of course, the email is theformatpodcast@outlook.com, theformatpodcast@outlook.com. You can reach out, tell me you love the show. You can tell me you hate the show. I wouldn't like that as much, but it lets me know you're listening. You can let me know if you think I'm the biggest dummy talking sports on the internet or wherever. Again, that's fine. The interaction's great. We can debate it. We can discuss it. That's cool. I got no problem with that. Um, I'm also introducing a new segment. I've been talking about this for the last few weeks, so continue to keep them coming. The mailbag segment. If you reach out via Instagram or Twitter, put your comment or your question, which I'll then answer directly on the next episode of the pod. Hashtag mailbag. Hashtag mailbag. If you're reaching out via email, just type in all caps mailbag in the subject line. I'll do my best to get to it on the next episode of the show. All right. So make sure you're doing all that. And as always, sit back, relax, and listen up to episode 84 of The Format. Got a special guest here. I have Zach Goodall from SI operated allgators.com and co-host of the Locked On Gators podcast. Zach, thanks for taking the time to join me. How you doing today?
Absolutely, Bruce. I appreciate you having me on. Doing great. I'm excited to talk about football as always.
Yes, sir. So let's get right to it. As I mentioned to you kind of before we got started here, we're going to take some time to talk Florida Gator football today. And you know what? Before I even get to that, let me give a shout to some of the biggest Gator fans I know. Hi, Noel, if you're listening. Hope you enjoyed the pod. We're going to talk about your Gators. And, of course, I cannot leave out the biggest Gators fans I know, the Hodges family, Anthony, Catherine, Chelsea, and Hannah. Enjoy the pod. We're going to talk about your guys, all right? So We're going to start. Full disclosure, I am not at all an SEC fan. I wasn't born in SEC territory. I grew up kind of in Big East, ACC country, and I've also lived in Big 12 country. So, I've been around a little bit. I've had an opportunity to see a lot of different types of college football. And the reason that I am not an SEC person, honestly, there's a few, but the biggest one is the fan perception. And that's the fact that SEC fans act like no one else in the country plays college football, and it drives me crazy. And realistically, my problem with that is the conference, like most conferences, is very top heavy. It's built on mainly about 4 programs: Florida, Georgia, Alabama, and LSU, and the others in, rotating years. But, with that, you get that kind of entitled attitude. You get Arkansas fans and Kentucky fans, yelling about the SEC, and you're like, you guys are bottom feeders. You haven't done anything, and most teams from other conferences would match up just fine with you. You know what I mean? So that drives me crazy. Your take on the fan perception of the SEC?
I'm the same way as you. I just started covering college football within the past 2 years. I'm a young guy myself, but I was covering the Jacksonville Jaguars as a part of SB Nation and some other sites dating back to when I was in high school. So
Okay.
covering college as a whole and learning the fan bases across the entire nation and different conferences has been a whirlwind, to say the least. I don't want to be rude or anything, but yeah, the arrogance is there without a doubt.
Absolutely.
It's a little crazy at times. People, especially this year in the SEC, and I can only talk about it covering it from 2 years, but even in the past 2 years, you see the differences in defensive play. And isn't that what the SEC is built on? Like the tough physical defensive football that
Well,
Kyle
we'll
Trask
we'll
and
get to
Joe
that, because
Burrow.
that's right. That is not
Yeah.
at all what we're seeing this season, and that's definitely something we'll get to a little bit down the line.
Yeah, exactly. It's just those guys that's never been the norm with the
Mm-hmm.
SEC. And yeah, it's fun. I love offensive football, but
Mm-hmm.
we're very quickly getting away from the brand that is SEC football.
Yes.
It's kind of copycat. It's
Yeah.
following some other conferences,
Mm-hmm.
but people will still take credit for being the SEC.
Right.
We got to share the love here a little bit.
I agree. The second thing I want to talk about on that front is media perception. Okay, you and I were both members of the media. We're both reporters, although I don't cover college football specifically. I do more talking about it here on the podcast. But where I get frustrated with that is the lack of objectivity among college football media, in terms of the college football media often parroting a lot of the same things that we hear from SEC fans, and that's just perpetuating the biases, and it drives me nuts. I mean, if you look at it, one of the biggest things, and I'll touch back on this in a little bit, is kind of that even bleeds over to the NFL in terms of groupthink. But I'm not sure why, we act like, and I've talked about this on the pod before, the SEC is just so far and away the superior conference. Again, extremely top heavy. A lot of great players down here, no problem admitting that. But, and of course, the argument is going to be, well, they're consistently winning championships. But there's other factors that go into that. The championship is not objective in college football the way it is in the other major sports. Where are you in terms of how the media treats the Southeastern Conference in terms of football?
I would agree with you there as well. And my experience with the beat I'm on, a lot of great people around here. I haven't had any run-ins, and I think that everyone around here does their job really well. But I mean, even with just particular parts of Florida media or SEC media, and even just across college in general,
Yep.
I see a lot of, I won't necessarily call them fans and go that road, but I see
Mm-hmm.
a lot of school graduates then serving their beat.
Mm.
And a lot of times those people will naturally have a little bit of a slant. They
Right.
won't necessarily see through all of the negatives that they're, all of maybe the fibs that the head coach will tell or something. They'll take it a little positively, or they'll run from it or run with it. And I, especially being a guy that didn't cover college before, a guy that also still does cover the NFL, I don't want to treat it like that. If I'm covering a team, if I'm covering especially an SEC team, like they're supposed to be the cream de la crop. But at the same time, I'm going to hold them to those standards. I'm not just going to
Mm-hmm.
let them like do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta hold them accountable, just like you do any. I mean, these SEC fans love to, for example, right or wrong, make fun of UCF for their national championship claim and everything. And
Right.
I don't respect that part of it, but you got to respect what UCF was able to accomplish
Mm-hmm.
just over the past couple of years in terms of legitimately building a non-Power 5 program.
Yep.
But to the SEC, UCF's just a joke.
Right.
Even to the bottom feeders of the SEC, they think UCF's a joke. There's not
Which is
a
ridiculous. UCF would probably smoke Arkansas, Kentucky,
exactly.
Mississippi State. There's some teams that would get smoked by UCF in the SEC.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Everyone views them as these schools that aren't SEC as like baby brothers almost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Maybe not even that level of respect. And it's weird. It's college football. It's enjoy all the different conferences and all the differences between them all.
Right. So the next thing I want to talk about that, and again, I'm still on my soapbox here, it drives me crazy is, and this leads more towards the whole thing of, okay, the SEC is consistently winning championships. Granted, can't argue that. But we had the BCS, which was, a lot of computers, and then you had voters. And then now you have the college football committee, which is clearly biased towards the SEC, clearly and heavily. And people are going to say, how can you say that, Bruce? And let's be real here. If you look at it, every year you have like 4 teams from the SEC in the top 10, and you can argue, well, those are the best teams, or you can argue that the committee is deliberately, and this is my thought on it, ranking these teams higher so that when they lose against each other, the losses don't hurt as much. For instance, you have Georgia in the top 10. They've got 2 double-digit losses on their record. Like, come on, it's ridiculous.
That was my exact example I was going to point to is
Mm-hmm.
Georgia has no place in this top 10 at all this year. It's just there's no reason for it. And I think
Yes.
everyone saw that when being like BYU. Yes, I understand the loss to CCU and that they're
Mm-hmm.
an independent and they've certainly taken an unconventional route in what's been an unconventional year.
Yeah.
But how can you possibly look at them, no matter what their circumstances are,
Mm-hmm.
think that they deserve to be lower than Georgia, who, like you said, had the 2 double-digit losses?
Correct. And the funny thing, Georgia, I believe the teams they've beaten have a record of 12-29, but they're in the SEC. They're Georgia, so that automatically gives them extra credit other teams don't get.
It's weird.
And finally, you hear it all the time. The SEC is the closest thing to the NFL defensively and athlete-wise and all that, and maybe that's true. But that also creates biases among NFL scouts, NFL general managers, in terms of that belief that they have all the best players. And that's confirmation bias without context because the SEC has the most players drafted. But again, it's normally coming out of, for sure, you've got Georgia, you've got Alabama, you've got LSU, and then maybe Florida, A&M, Auburn on a rotating basis as that 4th team, depending on how they did that particular season. So again, it's the top heavy conference and everything coming out of those top 4 teams. And that's even got the NFL GMs thinking that way. And the argument I like to give is Notre Dame, a team who I love, but this is a team that's normally thought not to have great athletes and not to have great talent on the field. They are getting more guys drafted and sent to the NFL over the last 3 or 4 years on average than the average SEC school. Like 2 years ago, Notre Dame, I think, had 6 players drafted, 4 undrafted rookie free agents, and the average SEC team, I think, had 4.5 players drafted. How do we explain that if they're so far and above the best players in the country?
Well, I think it definitely comes down to development too. I understand why NFL teams look towards the SEC so much, just based on the recruiting aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, so many schools down there are able to pull in these good classes and fill up the top of recruiting rankings. But then again, so is Notre Dame, so is Ohio State. So it does extend beyond the SEC, and it does come down to having a good coach that can take that talent and ascend it. And Notre Dame is certainly capable of doing that. Brian Kelly's proven that he can do that across his roster. Dan Mullen has proven that he can do that at Florida with, we saw 4 receivers from Florida go into the NFL last year in the deepest wide receiver class in NFL history.
Mm-hmm.
And those are just 2 examples, but you see it everywhere. You see it with the small schools that are producing talent and that can do it consistently. Recruiting's nice. NFL has more than enough reason to look at these SEC schools for that and maybe even find some diamonds in the rough. But if I'm an NFL scout, I'm trying to get the numbers of who I view as the top talent developers in college football, not talent acquire. I'm trying to think of the right word, but acquirers.
Right. No, I
I,
get it.
I want someone that can take even the 2-star talents and turn them into a 4-star player.
Mm-hmm.
And I want those contacts because I know that they can find me some guys.
Got it. Got it. So let's kind of move forward here. I can stop bashing the SEC now. I bet the Gators people are like, what is wrong with this guy? But let's talk a bit about the Gators' current position, and that's one half of the Southeastern Conference Championship game this year. So first, I want to start. Obviously, you cover them, closely. What are the Gators' chances of upsetting Alabama and winning this game?
Mm, I think Florida, for one, I think the 14-point opening line in favor of Alabama, I was not surprised. Of course, Alabama is going to get that type of
It
that
seems a
that
bit
type of
high to
line.
me.
It's extremely high. I think
Mm-hmm.
Florida is capable of matching scores with Alabama the
Okay.
entire game.
Okay.
There could be one or two mistakes that will end up, leaving them a bit behind. We've seen Kyle Trask where he might have that one throw that it's like, huh. But otherwise, he's playing Heisman caliber ball. I do think. I think he is more deserving than the other quarterbacks that appear to be in the running. Mac
Mm-hmm.
Jones, Trevor Lawrence, Justin
Mm-hmm.
Fields, Zach Wilson. But where Florida is behind Alabama is they're not two-dimensional. They think they can run the ball, and they've shown that they can in moments, but they can't depend on it.
Mm-hmm.
They can't take away from their passing game with it. They just can't afford to do that. And their defense, while it's gotten better throughout the year, again, it's like the offense where all it takes is one drive and something can change. We've seen Vanderbilt look like they can stay in games. We've seen Kentucky look like they can stay in games against Florida
Mm-hmm.
because they come out, they script up pretty well to start the game, and Florida's defense just looks lost. You cannot afford that against guys like Devonta Smith, Mac
Mm-hmm.
Jones, Najee Harris, this
Right.
incredible Alabama offensive line. While Florida may be able to match scores and keep in the game with Alabama from start to finish, I just think Alabama as a whole is so much more versatile in what they can do and so much more sound as a Nick Saban team that
Mm-hmm.
I do think they'll end up taking it. Things could change. I could be wrong, but that's
Okay.
that's where I'm at now.
So let's talk about your keys to winning. First, you briefly mentioned it, but how do the Gators go about trying to slow down that Alabama offense?
Hold. Put your hands on Devonta Smith as much as possible.
Right.
They're gonna have to. I mean, their safety play has been relatively atrocious this year. I think they're gonna have to end up having Kyer Elam follow Smith around, and Smith's got, great breakaway speed. And if he
Yep.
can win on double moves against Elam, that's where Elam is kind of susceptible because he's a longer, more physical, not the most athletic, but athletic enough to get you by
Okay.
type of corner. I think it was Dontario Drummond week 1 burnt him pretty bad on a double move. So if Devonta Smith can have his way with those, even Florida's best corner will struggle at times. But I think if you got to have Elam follow him. You've got to find a way to contain the run. As we saw with Kentucky, there was some lacking in gap integrity for even just a 2-drive stretch that made it seem like a totally different ballgame, and like Kentucky had some control. So then Florida finds these ways then to suddenly flip the switch with their run defense as the game goes on and get better. You would hope that it may be the other way around, that they're able to slow Najee Harris, make Mac Jones a little uncomfortable out the gate and try and take an early lead with your offense, because I think they're just going to have to go full out aggressive with the air attack and try and find ways to get downfield as much as possible and just keep scoring.
Got it. So on that side, you started to get into it. What do you think is the best way offensively that Florida is going to be able to attack that Alabama defense, which we have seen has been susceptible this year? It is not the typical put them in the sleeper hold Alabama defense. What do we think Florida has to do this year to be this game to be successful?
I think they just need to stay true to what they do. They've said it, and we see it. We saw it this past week with a miserable running performance against Tennessee. But in fairness, they didn't really try to establish it. And if they did, we probably would have questioned them. It's why would you take the ball out of Kyle Trask's hands? So, but with that, you can't afford to get cute against Nick Saban. You can't think you're going to try and trick him. You got to just come out and do what you do well. Florida has found ways to scheme open the passing attack just like crazy this year. I mean, we saw it against Georgia, and Georgia does have a great defense and a great, amount of talent on their defense from what they've been able to recruit. And Florida put them in a spin cycle. I mean, they just ran
Mm-hmm.
wheel routes. They ran 8 wheel routes for 217 yards in that game to their running backs and tight ends. I've never heard of that type of production on, especially a play like a wheel route. I mean, I understand if you can take a slant route or you can take a curl route all day against a certain corner, but I've never heard a wheel route being so successful against a good defense specifically throughout one game. So, I mean, they say they take games one game at a time.
Mm-hmm.
Mullen and Brian Johnson need to be planning out their air attack based on what they've seen from Alabama's defensive film. Just they needed to start doing it weeks ago, and I believe that they have. I would figure that they've been getting ahead on it and trying to script up maybe 20 or 30 plays that they can realistically try and use throughout the first half into the second half a bit rather than just an easy opening script, because they're going to have to be aggressive. They're going to have to score as many points as possible as early as possible.
Okay, so if the Gators lose, and you said you expect them to lose close in this one, uh, do they still get into the college football playoff? Should they? Because we know if Alabama loses, they're going to get in. Like they just are. You know, the committee is all that's going to happen. And if they do get into the playoff, being Florida, how would they look against any configuration of Clemson, Ohio State, and Notre Dame? Depending on which of those, which two of those three teams get in.
Yeah, I think if Alabama wins, then Florida won't make it.
Mm.
What happens with Texas A&M or Ohio State,
Mm-hmm.
I will leave up to the committee because
Right.
I would not want to have to deal with this type of scheduling mess that we've seen this year. More power to them. I hope there's not SEC bias, and I would hope that there aren't
Really?
2 SEC teams.
I'm
Even
pretty
if,
sure that's what would happen.
yeah, I like Texas A&M, and I liked what they were able to do against Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I think Florida would win that game 9 times out of 10.
Mm-hmm.
And with that being said, if Florida's a 2-loss team, I'm not putting them in the playoff, and I'm not putting Texas A&M in. At that point, I probably am going with Ohio State, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe because I love chaos, maybe I just put in Cincinnati. But one way or another,
I'd love to see that. Cincinnati's pretty good. They're pretty physical, but and as much as I like to root for the little guy, just because I like to upset the college football playoff apple cart, yeah, they'd probably get diced up by Alabama.
yeah, for
It'll
sure.
look something like Alabama, Michigan State a few years ago.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, it'd have been like if UCF did make the playoffs a couple years ago. As fun as they were, I don't.
Well, you know what? I'm not going to get into that, but I disagree very simply on the standpoint that Auburn beat Georgia and Alabama in back-to-back weeks that year, and then UCF beat them in the Peach Bowl. So, I mean,
Fair.
UCF when they were undefeated, that was a heck of a football team.
It
Scott Frost
was.
had there. But
It definitely was, but
right,
transitive property.
yeah. So, taking it back to the Gators, Trask for Heisman. He's got a crazy stat line, over 3,200 passing yards, 38 touchdowns, only 3 interceptions, record-setting season for the SEC, I think, in terms of consecutive 4 passing touchdown games. What's his chances of winning the Heisman? First, yeah, let's start there. What do you think are his chances of winning the Heisman? I think he's probably got to be the favorite at this point, right?
I think he needs to be. I know everyone's talking about it coming down to the winner of Florida versus Bama. And
Mm.
if Alabama wins, it should be Mac Jones. Florida wins, it should be Kyle Trask. That's
I think
not.
there's, I think there's a guy up in Columbus who might argue, but anyway,
Yeah, that's not how the award should operate.
I
It should
agree.
be the most outstanding player in college football. And if
Mm-hmm.
we're being completely, totally, 100% honest, you could also make that argument for some non-quarterbacks, particularly one on both of these teams, in Kyle Pitts and Devonta Smith.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure some other players. Honestly, he would never be considered, even if they were doing this. But I've loved watching what Elijah Moore has done at Ole Miss and how crazy productive he's been in that offense. But I
Mm.
digress. With that being said, if it is going to be a quarterback award and we are going to base it off of what they've done throughout the season and not
Mm-hmm.
just in one game, you look at Kyle Trask. this has been Florida's worst stretch of offensive play this season, these past 3 weeks, and they've still scored over 30 points per game. That they have not gone under that in a single game this year.
Mhm.
And Trask has 10 touchdowns and 0 interceptions in that stretch. In that stretch of games, he's averaging 357.3 yards and 3.3 touchdowns per game with 0 interceptions.
Insane.
That's better than Mac Jones, Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, and Zach Wilson's season-long production in those same categories
Mm.
in Trask's worst stretch of football. So from looking at
Yeah.
even the simple stuff in a per game situation, I think it's very easy to hand it to Trask at this point.
Hmm. No, that's a great point. Again, I'm kind of partial to Justin Fields. I think that maybe Ohio State having a more viable run game kind of takes his numbers down a little bit. But if you're just looking at it apples for apples, yeah, I think you're right. The Trask has to be probably the runaway favorite to win this thing.
For what it's worth, I am a Jaguars fan.
Mhm.
We are, well, I guess I should say was, because I've just started covering the Buccaneers recently.
Mm.
But I will say I do love the idea of Justin Fields in black and teal.
I've said that a couple times as well. Not that I'm a Jags fan, but I think it might be worth doing if Trevor Lawrence is already gone. Honestly, if I had the number one pick, I'd take Justin Fields over Trevor Lawrence, and I've said that too, but that's a different discussion.
I don't hate it. I don't hate it.
Right. So let's talk Dan Mullen and his influence on and development of Kyle Trask at the quarterback position. What do we have to say here? What has he done to unlock Trask's ability and really, let this thing explode this season the way it has?
Well, I think Trask, I mean, he's obviously the underdog story, the guy that didn't play. It's hard to say that anyone actually saw this coming, no matter what anyone tells you. But
Mm-hmm.
we have heard dating back to before Trask even started playing that they liked him a lot. They loved the mental side of his game, his understanding of the offense,
Mm-hmm.
his understanding of their concepts. And Dan Mullen, he's a coach that obviously he's a quarterback whisperer, as people call him, but he likes his quarterbacks to be dual threats. That's why Felipe Franks started over Kyle Trask for as long as he did, because, yeah, he wasn't nearly the quarterback signal caller that Trask is, but the dude could move.
Right.
On top of that, he had a freaking cannon. But Mullen has done this where he's changed his offense around compared to what he normally likes to run. It's more West Coast, a spread West Coast. They are airing it out. They aren't utilizing the quarterback run game or the run game really at all. It's not. We've seen Dan Mullen have success with quarterbacks, but not the way he's doing it with Trask.
Mm-hmm.
So you look, and I think it truly is a combination of the two. Not to take anything away from Kyle because of what he's been able to do, but Mullen's understanding of building different offenses for different quarterbacks, we've always appreciated it, but I think it's truly gone to another level, seeing this type of quarterback that feels like he's almost from the 90s. He's not what we're starting to move towards being more traditional with today's game. And Mullen's done a great job of adjusting to that, and put together, they seem unstoppable.
Yeah, you know what? It almost looks like not quite as much of the 5 receiver spreads, but it almost looks like the fun and gun, the way Kyle Trask is out there throwing it around and really, bombs away downfield. I did think that was interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What's your take on his next level outlook in terms of NFL?
I think he's capable of being a good NFL quarterback. I'm not putting him in the conversation of Lawrence, Fields, Wilson. I think those guys, Trey Lance, they all have these exceptional physical talents
Mm-hmm.
that Trask just doesn't have. His arm strength gets undersold. It has improved, and he's not got this great deep ball. It's more about the velocity on the short to much improved intermediate velocity to the outsides as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's improved on the run. I call him slow. He runs kind of like molasses when he's being used as a rusher, but he's improved with his pocket presence, his mobility in little short areas, his awareness. Just in general, he can make throws on the move way better than he did before, and that'll cut it. That'll do at this point. If you're able to at least come out and do that, then you you have a bit of a ceiling or you have a decent floor for the NFL and a rising ceiling at that point. And with that being said, teams are going to want to go for these generational type prospects or guys that have these uncanny tools. And Trask may not have that, but his understanding of the game, the improvement you have seen from year 1 to year 2, probably makes him a guy that'll end up going in the first round, maybe early second. I wouldn't put him in that top 10 conversation, but
Mhm.
rather you look towards a Tampa Bay, a New Orleans, a team that'll be picking in the 20s, maybe can afford to jump a few spots just to secure a guy, and they've got someone for their long term, especially a guy that was a backup for 7 years. If there's anyone that'd be willing to sit behind the likes of Tom Brady or Drew Brees for a year or two, I'm sure Kyle would be cool with it.
Got it. Got it. So let's move to one of Trask's main weapons, arguably his favorite target, tight end Kyle Pitts. Uh, 36 catches on the year. I think he missed a couple of games, 641 yards, almost 18 yards per catch, and 11 touchdowns. Pretty dangerous. First, how good is he?
He's unlike anything I've seen at the tight end position. Being a Jags fan myself and covering the Jags back a while ago, felt like every year we were looking for tight ends.
Hmm.
They never really panned out. Even Mercedes Lewis' career arc just started going downhill, and they were
Hmm.
looking for a new one. And I was always looking towards the new era tight end, the guys that were more dynamic pass catchers. Blocking was important, but it almost could come second with what you were able to do with them. And Kyle Pitts is just, he's a generational new era tight end. He's a guy that I think will come out and be in that conversation with the Travis Kelce's in the NFL when he gets there. With the Darren Waller, I actually think his game is incredibly similar to Darren Waller's. They look like receivers in
Hmm.
these huge bodies that are willing blockers, and they can at least get the job done in that respect. It's just you can't guard someone that's 6'6", 240, probably going to run in the probably high 4.5s, but for that size is just ridiculous.
So I on a recent episode of Locked On Gators podcast, which you co-host, I don't know if it was you or your co-host, but they said that Pitts is the best tight end they've seen in college. So I sat back and thought about that. And of course, being a Notre Dame fan, some guys and we like to call that O-line U and tight end U, some names popped out to me. Your Kyle Rudolphs, Cole Kmet, Tyler Eifert, even freshman phenom Baby Gronk, Michael Mayer. And then you go to a school like Oklahoma, Jermaine Gresham, Mark Andrews. You go to Miami, Jeremy Shockey, et cetera, et cetera. I thought as good as Pitts is, that was a kind of strong statement to say that he was the best tight end that you've seen in college. How do you think he ranks among some of those guys that I've named? Because those are some real good ones.
They are. I believe that one was Demetrius. My co-host, is definitely on board with the Kyle Trask. I don't know if he's said this yet, so I might get in trouble for saying the take, but Demetrius thinks he's probably the most talented, or certainly top 2 or 3 players in Florida history. He's that good.
Woo!
Man, is that good. I mean, like I said, and you're right, those guys are all up there. I probably wouldn't stand on the soapbox to call Pitts it just yet with my age, my lack of covering college football in the past like that. But I think you've got to include him in the conversation just because, again, as good as those tight ends are, were any of them able to run a post corner with the fluidity in their hips and the footwork of Kyle Trask? I'm not sure. I know that a lot of them were good receivers, but I've
Mm-hmm.
never seen a physical specimen do some of the things that he does. As a complete tight end, that might not be all he needs.
Mm-hmm.
He does need to improve as a blocker. He's
Right.
gotten better. He's willing and he's physical, and you do enjoy seeing that. But is he a great blocker? No. So these tight ends, for example, I know for sure with some of them, and I would think with the others, they have that advantage, making them a bit more complete
Mm-hmm.
players.
Fair enough. And what do you see from him on the next level?
I do think he's a top 20 pick at least. I don't know, and obviously we need to see how the draft order plays out, but I was
Mm-hmm.
looking through the top 10 the other day, and as it was standing, I couldn't really think of a team that would need to take him at that point unless they just decided he was the best player available and that was their strategy. Because of tight end value, they can change an offense, but you know that there are more valuable positions out there when it comes to a drafting perspective. So I'm curious to see exactly how it'll shake out, who will be drafting in the top 10 to 15. But if there's a team that even is thinking about upgrading a tight end in that range, I do think you've got to consider them.
Okay. So let's talk. Who are some other key offensive players for the Gators who maybe don't get as much love that we should be watching out for, even if they're guys who maybe don't get as much time this year?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many guys that are productive. Like, I feel like I should say Kadarius Toney because we talk about Trask
Mm-hmm.
and Pitts
Mm-hmm.
that you forget about him. But then
Yeah.
again, like Tony's got 8 touchdown receptions. It's not
Right.
like he's being slept on. Trayvon Grimes is another one. He's almost like the number 3 pass catcher, and he's putting up number 1 type of production. Like the dude is also earning himself some serious draft stock when it's all said and done.
Mm-hmm.
But he's a bit overshadowed with what's all around him.
Right.
Personally, I'm going to go an unconventional route here. I'm going to go running back Dameon Pierce. I was talking up their run game just not being that successful, and they really haven't needed it. Therefore,
Mm-hmm.
they haven't used it. I do think if they put together a plan where they wanted to run the ball, they could. We saw it against Arkansas where they had 208 rushing yards, and they love to spread the ball around in their running back group just like they do at wide receiver. I think in
Mm-hmm.
that game against Arkansas, they had 5 or 6 running backs end up taking a carry. But I've been a proponent for a long time that Dameon Pierce should be the main guy getting, I would say, 80% of the carries out of this backfield, especially if they were to increase it, because the guy does not go down. He has only gotten more agile over time because he came in as a bit of a power back, but he's stocky. He's gotten more athletic. His hip fluidity has really improved. He's got good vision, and he might get hit within a half a yard to a yard of the line of scrimmage. He's still going down 4 yards down the field 4 times out of 5. He's just a guy that does find a way to create for himself, especially when Florida's run game just hasn't been able to produce as a whole. And next year, with Kyle Trask gone, with Pitts, Toney, Grimes, who's to say that there won't be some shakeups with the coaching staff if teams are in the NFL with us expecting at least 5 head coaching jobs to be open?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a team comes calling for Dan Mullen. But with that, I don't see Florida replicating its passing game success a year from now because it's just been so historically good from a program perspective.
Kind of like LSU.
Exactly. They're
Mm-hmm.
going to have to find a way to balance it back out. Dameon Pierce will be a senior.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at that point, especially with Emory Jones, a real dual threat quarterback who does like to run the ball,
Mm-hmm.
they'll be able to open up way more opportunities for Pierce. So you hear it here, especially from a 2022 draft perspective. Dameon Pierce is my dude.
Do you see, as you mentioned him, and what you feel that he's able to do in the run game, do you feel like he and Florida schematically and physically will be able to run it enough in this upcoming conference title game to keep Alabama honest? Because as you mentioned earlier, in football in general, but especially against this coach and this team, you don't want to go in one-handed.
Yeah, they are going to need to use it. However much they do, I do think they're going to want to stick to passing the ball more than running against Alabama. I think they just need to stick with what they're good at. But you're right; they're going to need the run game to at least complement the passing game, make them look like they're 2-dimensional, even in some respects. And they've spread the ball around to different running backs. I like Malik Davis; he can be electric with the ball in his hands, but you don't see it from a rushing perspective. You see it way more as a pass catcher. If I'm handing out carries, especially against Alabama, at this point, I think I'm letting Pierce do the wear and tear and letting Naquan Wright come in and spill him every now and then. He's a shorter, stockier, but also really elusive type of back who can catch the ball. Um, I just think if you're trying to wear down a defense, Pierce is your guy.
Okay. So let's talk on the other side of the ball, key defensive players that we may not be hearing as much about. Give me a couple of names and tell me about them.
I think everything starts on the pass rush for Florida. I was talking about Kyrie Elam earlier, and I think he is far and away their best defensive back. But I mean, Florida's got enough secondary struggles around him that you don't necessarily even get to appreciate what he's done. He's according to Pro Football Focus, quarterbacks have only completed 38% of their 49 targets his way this year. It's an incredible stat, and he's got 2 interceptions, 8 pass breakups as well. But the safety room, it totally takes away. Devonta Smith could end up having a huge game just because those safeties really, really struggle in coverage. But anyway, that could be the key glaring issue. Key defensive players besides Elam, you look up in the pass rush. Brenton Cox, the Georgia transfer, has really come along as the weak side pass rusher. He still has some moments where in general you want to see better all-around game, but the flashiness, the athleticism off the edge to create pressure and rattle quarterbacks at least a little bit is there. He'll need to have a huge game to get Mac Jones off his spot. Paired with Zachary Carter, a guy that's moved inside and out along the down defensive line this year. He's really lengthy. Just from being so lengthy and physical, he can create pressure without exactly always finishing plays. TJ Slayton's a run stuffer. He's not a guy you want on the field all the time because he's so big and he can get washed out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But when he's active, he can be a really, really dang good player. And Kyrie Campbell, they missed him the first 3 games of the year for an undisclosed reason. And he came back and the unit went from just being miserable to finally finding its footing, regaining the SEC lead in sacks and tackles for loss at one point, and still being up there. I believe still leading at least in tackles for loss as of the time we record this podcast. So it's all about the defensive line for Florida. They've got to be able to create pressure, and they've got to finish. They got to finish quickly because there's only one part of the secondary they can really depend on in coverage, and that's how Alabama's going to try and beat them.
Right. I feel like no one's, for the most part, been able to consistently get any pressure on Alabama this year. And like you said, that's allowed Mac Jones plenty of time to just sit back there and toss it to those freak receivers that he's got, especially Smith. And I guess you never want to see anyone hurt, but Florida's got to be glad they don't also have to deal with thinking about Jalen Waddle.
Yeah, they absolutely are. I mean, I think Devonta Smith is capable of putting up the monstrous game that he did against LSU and that he's done against, maybe not totally what he did against LSU, but similarly dominant like he was against LSU and like we've seen to some other opponents this year. I think he stands a chance doing that against Florida, at least as long as Kyrie Elam's not following him around on every snap.
Okay, Zach, so before I let you get out of here, and this has been some great stuff, tell me, what else do, people who aren't inside the Gators programs like you are, what else do people need to know about what's making Florida so special this year? What's making them dangerous? So that's number one. And then number two, if they do pull the upset and get into the playoffs, how do you think they look? Because then you're clearly going to have 2 SEC teams in, right? There's no doubt about it. They win, then you got to have them in Bama. How do you think they look against, whether it's Notre Dame, Clemson, or Ohio State?
I think the biggest reason for their success beyond their amazing passing offense has just been a mindset. It's been a weird year for everyone, obviously. I think any team that has made it this far has adopted a one game at a time mindset, not getting stuck on the negatives because there's just so many outside factors that can cripple teams in this odd season of college football. In Florida, they had their early COVID outbreak, and I think they just released testing numbers. So I don't have them in front of me right now, but as of last week, they had only had, I think, 1 COVID-19 case across the entire football team since that outbreak in early to mid-October. You can tell they've bought in. The players talk about it, and we've seen that type of atmosphere under Dan Mullen, comparatively speaking to the last head coach or two. The players have really bought into this being their job. They've got a lot of great talent that Mullen's been able to recruit, but they balance it out with a lot of experienced talent. I was going back to it this past offseason, and when everything started coming up, with COVID, lack of spring practice and everything, my first thought was, well, they've got a redshirt senior quarterback and a great quarterback whispered level head coach. They should be relatively unstoppable in the SEC in a year like this, where you look at Georgia, and at that point they had like three guys competing to end up replacing Jake Fromm and a new offensive coordinator and no spring ball to do it. It just seemed like common sense that that experience was going to take Florida far. So that is something you have to consider. If you're a young team and you're going against Florida, they do have the experience on you. In some places, it hurts them because it isn't as talented guys as some of the younger players, but their knowledge of the system and what's required of them has really allowed them to be successful throughout the year. As for the playoff, as for getting in, yeah, I do think it would be Florida and Alabama both making it at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
No question about it.
obviously, it'll depend on what happens with the ACC championship as well,
Mm-hmm.
to see how the rest of it shakes out. And at a neutral site, especially if Florida is able to beat Alabama once, I feel like they're capable of doing it again. Uh, and I would have to see more. I would especially need to go in and scout that ACC championship game to get a better feeling for how Florida would be able to play against a Clemson or against a Notre Dame. But you know that these are teams similarly to Florida that are extremely well coached, some of the best of the best. There are game plans, there are not game scripts, and they have these same mindsets. That's where everyone is this year, is the same competitive mindset, treating every game like it's one game at a time. That's what's separating the great and the good teams. And I
Mm-hmm.
think if you've made this playoff, you are a great team. And Florida can't consider themselves safe with their passing attack against any of them.
Fair enough. Well, Zach, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and talk that Gators football with us. Before you get out of here, why don't you let people know where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. If you guys want to find my work, I cover the Florida Gators as well as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for Sports Illustrated. You can find all of my articles from both sites on my Twitter page at Zach_Goodall. If you want direct access to both sites, it's easy enough. Just look up allgators.com and allbucks.com, part of Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation Network.
All right. Thank you so much, man. We appreciate it. Appreciate your time and all the good insight. You have a good one and enjoy that SEC title game, man.
Thank you.